There used to be that saying, I don't know if you remember, when people would say, the first offer is always the best offer.
That's right.
In my view, if a real estate agent ever says that to you, run 180 miles in the other direction. Because it's just not true, right? Welcome to the Lowedown, Wellington's #1 real estate podcast. I'm here again with my friend Adam, and we're going to talk about, from listing to sold, what we wish that sellers knew every time they listed their house with us. So, good topic, I think, Adam, because this is our bread and butter. This is what we do every day.
It's like getting the inside scoop on what really happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think there's multiple ways to market houses, isn't there? So if we start with that, start right at the start, like people have got
method of sale, you mean?
Method of sale,
Yeah.
which obviously we've got auction, we've got tender, we've got buy negotiation, deadline sale, which is really another form of tender or similar.
Yep.
So
asking price as offers
well.
over.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are all sorts of different ways to go about it. Different agents will have their different philosophies, of course.
Yeah.
Different agencies even will have their different cultures in terms of those philosophies.
And different kind of regions in the country will have different preferences too, right?
So let's talk about that. So Auckland they call auction town and Wellington tender town, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And so that's a fascinating difference in the culture of real estate. Do you have any thoughts on why that is personally? I've got some ideas.
On why Wellington is tender town and Auckland is auction town?
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking just before, and you suggested one reason is that Aucklanders prefer to show off more than Wellingtonians. Right?
You don't need to say that on air.
No. Right? We're a bit more subdued and like to keep things private.
Yeah.
And so in a tender, your offer is private. But I don't really have, I don't have a view really on why it is that way, but I do have a view on that oftentimes it's best just to stick with what people understand.
Yes.
And so if the market understands, in Wellington the market understands tender well, it doesn't mean they like it. Buyers especially, they don't like it, but everyone understands the rules of the game. And so if all the players understand the rules of the game sort of flows more easily, right?
So there's a bit of a network effect there that once everyone's doing it, it sort of becomes structural to a degree because, so I agree with that. And actually, if you wind all the way back, which I think this is the answer, I think, is if you wind all the way back to the late 90s when Rob Garlick from back in the Leaders real estate days sort of innovated with the closed tender process, and that company at the time had a 40% market share, very different today. But so that kind of drove it, and then all of the top agents learned how to do it well, and then of course people come up behind them, and so the culture shift, really became the competitive process rather than being an auction process. It was a closed tender process, and then, like you said, the public become used to it, and therefore it becomes very hard to change that structural difference. Yeah. So I think that's the reason the cultures are very different. And both all methods of sale in the right environment, with the right person running them, can achieve a great result. There's no doubt about that.
There's no one size fits all, right? There are exceptions to the rule.
Yeah. But one thing I think has been fascinating to watch, especially over the last couple of years, is that the agencies that have come, there have been a few agencies that have come in and tried to bring auction into the Wellington market. And fascinatingly, they have all lost market share, after doing that. So it's been amazing to watch that.
So why do you think that an agency would do that? Why would an agency come
I think they're trying
and
to be
all
different.
of a sudden give it?
Yeah, I think they're trying to go, which I respect. I respect that from a competitive perspective. You come in, you say, well, these guys are doing this. So from a competitive perspective, you either want to, if you can't beat something, you want to at least match it to neutralize the advantage, right? If you can't beat it. If you can beat it, you want to do something totally different that's better and more convincing, and it's going to generate a better result. So I think
they're trying to get a point of
was,
difference and disrupt things a little bit.
And also I think the main company in mind also started a relationship with was an Auckland organisation that bought into Wellington. And of course, in Auckland's auction town, right? So they start bringing their trainers, they start bringing the people, the top agents in their game of doing auctions. So people do start to try and follow that, and then of course it ends up costing the agency because structurally it's not going to work in Wellington as well as it does in Auckland or Christchurch. So that would be my.
And so you said that anyone who's tried to bring in, or any agency that's tried to bring in auctions have kind of suffered as a result. But what about just from a seller's perspective?
Yeah. Well,
all a seller is interested in, right, is what's the best for my property? What is most likely, on average, going to deliver a better result? And normally that means a better price in a shorter time frame.
Exactly.
Right? Not too short, but
yeah. Well, I can't talk to price. I think that just because the stats are impossible to, you can't know what true value is, so therefore you can never determine what's working better on that front. But what we can see, and we've done a lot of maths on this, is looking at the different conversion rates of different companies.
Yep.
And we can see that the conversion rate, which is ironic because I know a lot of agents believe, it's often trained into agents that auction is a great way to convert into a sale. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the reasons I don't like them is because they say that they can be more convincing to an owner or a seller that the market is on the floor speaking. They have to make the decision on whether they lower their reserve at the time. And they believe that leads to more turnover. But we can see in the stats that actually hasn't, that the companies that are running auction are actually converting less of their listings to sale than the ones that are doing tenders. So it's been fascinating to see that.
Yeah, I mean, again, doesn't necessarily conclude that that's the reason why the conversion rate is lower. But
good point.
You know what I mean?
There's just generally worse training, worse agents. No, it's a good point. Correlation is not causation, obviously. But it is fascinating to see that. I'll put it this way: it's not causing them to have the opposite.
No, that's right. That's right.
So that is true.
Yeah. And what about from a seller's perspective? I mean, because look, as a buyer, one thing that I really love about an auction is I can see the market. I can see other people bidding. I know what the other offers are.
Yeah.
From a seller's perspective, my interpretation anyways, and I'm not anti-auction. I mean, I've sold property by auction multiple times, many times, not nearly as much as by tender. But my point is that if I think the property is right for an auction, I'm not against using that method. I just think that it's the exception rather than the rule. But what do you think about, from a seller's perspective, why is there a reason why you think perhaps sellers would not prefer an auction and why tender is better from an auction?
I think I mean, if I was a seller, knowing what I know about how auctions are trained, how they train auction, I would be skeptical of doing auction for that reason. I don't want to be bundled into a little room while I'm hot. I'm emotional. I have to make a decision on the spot. Pressure's on. Market speaking out there. Do I want to lower my reserve or not? Or do I want to, making these decisions in a very, very highly emotional state in a high pressure situation. So from that perspective, I would much prefer, with a tender, you can sit down, you can have a look at the spread of bids, and then you can go and have lunch. Yeah. You can have gin or champagne, depending on the outcome.
You can think about it. You can actually consider things rationally with a little bit of time around you, right?
Exactly. And then you can come back and make a decision or have a conversation with your agent on the phone and make a more rational decision, a more logical decision, and without being influenced so much on what to do. So that's one thing from, if I was a seller, what I'd be thinking about in that. And then the second one, of course, is, as you know, is, we see huge premiums with tenders that aren't, you can't get one bidder to bid against themselves and to pay a massive premium with an auction, whereas tenders can produce incredible results.
Or to compete with someone else and pay a massive premium.
Yeah, because the price is always dictated by the underbidder.
If someone comes in and they're 100,000, 200,000 above the next highest offer, if you ask yourself, well, in an auction situation, how do you get that extra 200,000? I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's definitely tricky. It takes a lot of skill, right? Yeah. I mean, just to your point, I agree that I am somewhat cynical about this, and I think that if we think about it just purely from a mercenary real estate agent's incentive, it's in a real estate agent's incentive to transact sales quicker. And so if I can apply a bit more pressure on the seller to sell quicker and to take some deals faster than they might otherwise take them, I can turn over, and if I'm missing out on 2% or 4% or however much of the price, it doesn't impact my business income very much, but that's as an agent, that's not our job, right? Our job is to get the best result for the vendor.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
So if we go to things we're in agreement that closed tender is the best competitive process. If we think about that, what do you think about pricing? Because what do you wish that owners knew about how to price their home before you came into the scene?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously as real estate agents and vendors, we're on the same team and we want the same outcome, which is a really good price, a really strong result in that regards, right? But ironically, you don't get a great price at the end by asking for a big price at the start.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. It's such
Would
a
you
good
agree?
point. Yeah, I totally agree. Well said. I mean, and of course this stuff is very counterintuitive for a seller.
It can be scary.
It can be scary, and the reality is that we talked about it last week with the RVs, obviously. But the reality is, if you hang something out that's too high, what happens is, because what people can't see when they're selling houses, they're in a vacuum where the only thing they get to think about is the house they're selling. And so they're thinking about marketing and price and presentation and stuff.
That's not the case for buyers.
For buyers, it's totally different.
Yeah.
Their experience is that they're just going from one property to the next, and they're just comparing.
It's just a series of comparisons.
What the features are versus what they have to pay for it. And they come to yours and say, what features have you got? This is what you're asking for it.
Yeah.
And so when we're marketing to buyers, we're not marketing to the seller. We don't want to make the seller happy with the marketing. We need to show value in a relative sense. So we need to make sure, and of course, if you're not purposeful about how you set that price, then what happens is, for example, you could run a closed tender with no price guide at all. Now, we used to do that a lot in the old days, but of course back then radial values were 30% below where things would sell for. So it's very counterintuitive for a seller, but actually that was helpful because buyers would see that low radial value, and of course then they would come in.
In the absence of any other guide, they use that radial value.
And there was no homes.co back then, there was no one roof, whatever, those estimates. So that's what they would use. They would come in, it would stimulate the competition, drive the price up. Now, of course, with the advent of homes.co, one roof, all sorts of different price estimates, plus with radial values having been previously significantly higher and now being perhaps closer, then the problem is if you just put no price marketing out there, then of course people are going to use those influences. And we know that the first number that a buyer sees when our goal is just to get them to the house, right? Our goal is to sell the viewing, not have the house sell for the most money before they come and look at it.
Totally, and that's a very important point. You just skipped over that very quickly, but the first stage is sell the viewing.
Sell the viewing.
Get them to, as many people as possible, to commit to walking through that door.
Exactly.
Give the buyers no reason to exclude this from their list.
Yeah. So having a price guide with a closed tender is very important, because with a closed tender there is no set price. So all we're saying when we put the guide into is anyone, if you've got less, don't bother. If you've got more, the owners are definitely going to consider it, so you should come. And that's it. But it allows us to put that number in a realistic zone that's going to help stimulate and make sure that in a relative sense, it's competitive. Yeah. And that's the game, from a pricing perspective.
So we sort of started this discussion with you don't get a big price by asking for a big price. So at the start of the process, just to sort of summarize it, what is it that drives that big result at the end more than anything else?
Competition amongst buyers.
It's the competition.
Yeah.
Right?
And you only get competition if people come interested to start with.
That's right.
And they're not going to hang a big price out there.
If as many people as possible look at your property and compare it to all the others, and they're deciding which ones can I go and visit this weekend, and yours seems to offer more value than the rest, you're going to get more traffic than the rest.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And we know after the first open home, right? If it's impossible to know in advance. We are all advising and making guesses and as best we can. But you go into that first open home, and if you get 20 groups, you've got 5 people asking for more information, and you've sent them information pack, you've got 3-second looks booked in for that week.
You've priced it competitively.
It's been competitively priced, and there's a lot of interest. If you get 7 people through and no one's requesting any more information, you got it wrong. And
that's right. I always say to buyers, look, I know that when I put a BEO price on it, I'm going to get the price wrong. I'd prefer to be wrong too low than wrong too high.
Well, you're wrong too high, you've got no sale at all.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wrong too low, I get a whole lot of people to talk to.
Yeah.
And the competition drives the price to where it should be.
Exactly.
Wrong too high, I've got no one to talk to. I'm becalmed in the ocean.
So these tender processes are relatively short, right? They can be 2.5 weeks is pretty typical for a good closed tender.
We tend to do 16 days, don't we?
16 to 18 days, yeah. So if you think about that, how do you think about the optimal time to be on the market and the competitive processes?
Well, we know just from our in amongst our team, a lot of experience. We know that if you sell it too quickly, you risk underselling the property. Not exposing it to enough buyers, not getting the buyers committed enough, that sort of thing, not invested enough. But then again, if you pass an optimal time, the value of your property in the market just gets eroded. Just in the same way, it just becomes stale, and people get very suspicious as to what's wrong with it, and so on. So we sort of expected that there'd be an optimal period where very quickly you'd rise, and then from there on, price would get eroded. And years ago, when we first
we did the maths,
when Low and Co started, did some research, didn't we? And we looked. I think it might have been 2015 or 2016 year, and we looked at the relationship between the sale price, and again, on average, compared to the rateable value. Individual case by case, that's a poor comparison, but over the whole market, it's useful.
Big sample size.
Yeah, that's right. And we wanted to know what's the relationship between the price as a function of rateable value and time on the market. And that's indeed what the data showed us over all the sales in Wellington City on a 12-month basis, was that it quickly rose to a peak and then it slowly eroded from there.
And it happened to be about 16 to 18 days on the market.
If I remember rightly, it was exactly 15 to 18, right? So that's exactly how the duration that we have our tender set.
It's fascinating.
Now, again, this is on average. Is every campaign average? No. But you've got to shoot for what's the norm and count on that rather than try and manipulate the exception.
And just to explain, from my perspective, why it goes stale. Like, it's surprising, right? Like, you think about how much money you pay for a house. Why should the shelf life be 3 weeks? And, so why is that? And I think the reason is because if you think the most motivated buyers are out there, the ones that have missed out twice,
that's right,
seen 30, 40 houses that they've been through, they're ready to make you an offer. They're the ones you want. You don't want someone
they know quickly.
Yeah, they know, but they see it quickly because they're out there, they're in the hunt, they've already sold their house or they've got to find somewhere, they're motivated. So they see it in that first 3 weeks. And then what happens is, because once you get to week 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, you're actually only attracting the new buyers into the market.
The ones who've only just come into the market.
Right? So you read that the shelf life is, there's a moving target of ready buyers. People are popping into it, and then they're popping out of it as they buy. But that's past as you buy in that early stage.
So on average, the buyers who are match fit, they see it quickly. Now, if you think about, there used to be that saying, I don't know if you remember, when people would say, the first offer is always the best offer. That's right.
My view on that, because I find this interesting. In my view, if a real estate agent ever says that to you, run 180 miles in the other direction, because it's just not true, right? Like, you can get an offer and it can be not, and then you can get another offer later and it's more. But what they're getting at, which is more to the point, is that there is a negative correlation between time on the market and the price you receive. But that's
after the initial period.
Yes, but that's very different than the first offer being the best offer, right? Because it just means that you're way less likely to get a higher offer in week 10 than you are in week 2. But the first offer in week 2 may not be the best offer.
It's just not always the case, is it? It can be the case sometimes. If you put your property on the market on a Tuesday and you've got an offer on a Thursday.
How do you know that's going to be the best, right?
Very high risk to take that one, right?
And I think the key is in your agent, because there's a strong incentive for agents to say you should accept an offer, isn't there? Right? There's a huge commission involved.
Just like what we're talking about with the auction process.
And so you want an agent that is not financially required, is not desperate to get that sale first and foremost, and you want an agent who's acting as a true fiduciary for you, because I know from my perspective that there's many times in my career when I've told people we've negotiated to the point where we've got that person to their maximum, and that we haven't been able to get any more. And I've said to people, look, I think we can do better than this. Now,
if indeed we believe that,
exactly. That's the key, and I think that's how you build a reputation over time in real estate. Is
fighting for the vendor's
you'll be right more often than you're wrong,
because
and like everyone, I've been wrong. Sometimes I have said that, and I've been wrong because I'm human, and we do make mistakes on that front. But if 80% of the time I'm right and I get more on average I'm getting better prices for my vendors, then I'm going to build a reputation, and it takes 5 minutes to destroy your reputation and a lifetime to build it, right? So you've got to have
it's a bit different, isn't it? If you've been on the market for 10 weeks, no offers, struggling for interest,
100%.
Then someone comes along and they make an offer, and that's the first offer you've received. Again, that might be the exception to the rule, that in that case, the first offer is the best one, right? Yeah,
that's right. So one of the interesting things I find is that the first thing sellers always say to me, doesn't matter who they are, where they are. Almost invariably, there'll be very odd exceptions to this. But the first thing they always say is, we don't need to sell.
Yes.
It's so interesting, isn't it?
I'm not desperate to sell.
Yeah. Look, we can always, we'll just rent it or whatever. But, what I find interesting on that front is, the obvious answer is, well, do you want to sell? Because if you want to sell, we can do that for you. But the reality is that... I think it's a fear response. I think people, this is a large asset. And I've noticed that everybody says it doesn't matter.
No one wants the market to perceive that they're a desperate seller and therefore will take any price.
Yeah, and,
right?
they're sort of like laying the land, aren't they, for you to say, because they understand, this is all subconscious, but they're about to potentially entrust you with their largest asset. They're about to pass that on to you. Yep. So they want to lay a parachute for them, because this is a big deal that they're, entrusting your, big sale. And I get that, right? And I totally respect it and I understand it, but I just find it really fascinating. It's like, because the way I think about value is we just need to work as a team to determine what the market price is. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we can beat that with a bit of influence, a little bit of, we can get a great result.
At the very least, get full market value.
Yeah, that's right. And and as a team, we need to determine what that is. And we don't know in advance. We do guesswork and we work together as a team through strategy to achieve that, which is very different than thinking, just thinking about what the exit strategy is.
Yeah, I mean, on the counter, if we look at it from a buyer's perspective, one of the things that the buyers hate is dealing with a vendor who has unrealistic expectations, or dealing with a vendor who isn't serious and who isn't motivated. You find that? 100%. And so I always find it actually very useful to explain to buyers what is motivating the sellers too, so they know they're engaging with a serious vendor.
Why do buyers
don't want to waste their time?
Is the first question they ask before what's the price? The first question they ask is, why is it underselling? Now the reason they ask that is not because they want to know whether they're desperate or not. They just want to know it's a genuine reason to sell.
That's right.
They're not just dipping their toe in the water.
We're not
just
they don't
like something about the house.
They're going to make a bunch of investment into exploring this property and determining are they going to offer it and how much and all that sort of stuff, right? They don't want to put that investment in only to find that the vendor's got their heads completely in the clouds.
Yeah. So another thing I think that's important for vendors to know, that would be great if more vendors understood before we came into the picture, is the importance these days of doing the discovery around disclosure upfront. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, partly it's just know what you're selling so that we can actually stand behind.
Yeah. Why shouldn't we know what we're selling?
That's right. Stand behind it. And also, it's just risk management. The more buyers we can get engagement with, the fewer buyers we lose throughout the process, the better chances are we're going to get an outstanding result for the vendor, right? And this whole principle of discovery up front, LIMS, builders reports, tenancy agreements, healthy homes reports, whatever the case might be, the more information we can supply to the buyers up front so they can get their head around everything, even if there's warts and problems and stuff with the property, if they've got time to get their head around it and time to work out how do we deal with this, then they can still make a decent offer. The real problem is, of course, when they find something out about the property just before they're about to make their offer. Well, they've lined up everything with their, with the crosshairs on looking at a certain target, and then the target moves and they're already under a lot of pressure. There's a real high risk at that point. We're going to lose them.
So I would characterize that as having a no surprise policy.
Exactly.
Because the reality is there's nothing that kills a deal more than a surprise.
Yep.
And the reality is if we're transparent about anything, as you pointed out, then buyers don't worry about it, right? Like they're okay with it if it's disclosed to them up front, 9 times out of 10. And also if we find out up front, we can determine what to do at that point. We can supply a quote potentially and disclose it. We could fix it before going to market. We can make decisions rationally and we can decide what to do. Whereas it's going to be a disaster if we find out halfway through that something's wrong that no one knew about. It's not no one's fault. But.
And if we disclose everything that we know up front and transparently, it also increases engagement because the buyers appreciate full disclosure. They then trust who they're dealing with. They can see this person is trustworthy.
Yes.
They're an expert in their field. I feel confident about putting my hands in the process.
If they double check it with their own reports, they're just double checking our data. That's okay. That's fine for them to get an independent view.
Of course.
But they're just double checking ours, right? So it smooths that whole that whole process over. So we talked about price briefly before. What would you? I think there's an interesting point there on how if sellers knew how to think rationally about the price or value of their house, just in terms of making decisions, particularly at the end of the process. What do you? If we wrap up on that, what do you think about it?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, isn't it? Or certainly a hot topic with the sellers because everyone wants to get top dollar for their property. But a lot of the time, I think maybe what you're getting at is that the sellers have a particular figure in mind that somehow they've determined their property might be worth, or a figure that they need in order to achieve a certain outcome in life and that sort of thing. And of course, how a buyer views a property, and the value of that property is really independent of the vendor's thoughts.
So in other words, you could run a closed tender, you could get 8 offers on it, you could get what is in the market today, a fantastic result, and a seller could say, well, that's not enough for my retirement, so therefore I'm upsizing to a new house, but I feel my house's value is worth more than that, so therefore I'm not going to take that. And so this is this happens all the time, and it's natural, right? But
so in that instance, the vendor doesn't take full price for their property, and so what is the implications of that? What's the impact of that course of action on their lives?
Well, it means that they can't move on. They can't do what they want. What their reason for selling is can't happen, and so they're delaying a decision for something. Like one example would be, if you want to upsize into your next house and you've got a really strong view on what the value of your house is and the market won't pay it, and then you make a decision to hold on for 3 years until maybe the market's magically capital gains happen, which is a speculation in itself. But let's just say the capital gain does happen, and then you sell and you get your price all of a sudden. Then, of course, what's going to happen is the house that you're going to buy has gone up by the same amount.
The upsized house.
In fact, if it's more expensive, it's gone up by more. So on a net basis, you're actually worse off.
Yeah, that's right.
And so we see people making those kinds of decisions all the time, and it can be quite irrational.
The other thing, of course, is that to decide not to take full market value today and wait for 2 years, that doesn't change the value of your home.
No.
That's not going to change the relative position of your home in the marketplace in 2 years' time. Does it actually? Is it going to make a difference? Generally speaking, no, right?
No. So that's why I would summarise that the most rational way for owners to think about value, especially if they've owned it for a long time, different if they bought at the peak of the market sitting on negative equity, very different situation.
Totally.
Right? They probably have to
that
hold
locks
on.
them out.
Yeah,
that locks them out.
But if they've owned it for a long time, had a lot of capital gain, they're sitting a lot of equity in there, then really what you want to do is engage with an agent that has the best strategy that you know is going to work for you to get the best price. Get on their team, and then it's you guys as a team working out how to get the best from the market. And then you mark to market once you get that result, right? And you accept the market price, and that way, you can be rational about it and move on.
Go out there, get the very best you can, and move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Last thing, what do you think? What's the social good of a real estate agent?
What's the social good of a real estate agent?
So not just for sellers, but just in general, what's the role of a real estate agent? It's not a trick question.
I don't know about the social good of a real estate agent. I mean, I just think that it's very difficult for people to buy and sell houses if the buyer and the seller are dealing directly with each other. They have opposite incentives or intentions. And the process of trying to reach an agreement between the two of them is so fraught with emotion and risk risk of getting upset or pissing someone off that the chance of the deal blowing up just goes up so much more.
Yeah. So and that's well said. And
we lubricate the market, right?
I always thought you looked a bit slippery. But yes, absolutely. Like the market just wouldn't turn, if it wasn't for having the real estate agents in place. And it's hard for people to see that, of course, but it is really, really important part of the market that we play, or role that we play in the market. Anyway, great to chat.
Yep, you too.
Appreciate it, Adam.
Fun as always.
That was the Lowdown. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe, and we'll be back to do it again next week. Thank you.
See you next time.